Hello and welcome. We are here today to conduct a comprehensive exploration into a truly singular figure in financial history. You probably know the name, but we are looking closely at the life, the crimes, and the long aftermath of Bernard Lawrence Madoff.
It is a name that represents a specific pivot point in how the public views the financial system.
Yeah.
When we discuss Madoff, we are discussing the largest known Ponzi scheme in history.
Right. And the numbers are, they're just frankly difficult to comprehend.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at an estimated $65 billion in paper wealth that simply did not exist.
The magnitude of the deception is unprecedented in modern financial history.
It really is.
Wow.
It is hard to overstate just how massive this event was, because before his arrest, Madoff was not seen as a criminal at all. To you, to me, to the general public, he was a pillar of Wall Street. He was a former chairman of NASDAQ. He was a prominent philanthropist.
He was considered an institution.
Exactly. He was the man you went to if you wanted steady, reliable returns. The public perception was one of absolute, unquestionable stability.
That public perception stands in stark contrast to the reality.
Yeah.
The reality was that of a fraudster running an operation that devastated thousands of lives. Our agenda for this analysis is to explore the biography of the man, the specific mechanics of the crime, how he actually accomplished it, and the complete timeline up to the most recent events involving his family in 2022.
And we really want to understand the paradox here, because Madoff ran a completely legitimate, highly successful business right alongside the fraud. That dual nature is a huge part of what made it so confusing for regulators and for the investors who trusted him.
We will maintain an analytical focus on the financial structures, the regulatory failures, and the sociological aspects of the fraud.
Right. We are keeping this entirely factual, focused on the mechanics and the history, because there are details here that the average person that you listening right now likely do not know.
Yeah.
You often hear about the billions, but you rarely hear about his early blue-collar jobs, or the very specific split-strike conversion strategy he claimed to use, or the reality of his life inside a federal prison.
To understand the end of this timeline, we must look at the beginning.
So let's start with those origins. Bernard Madoff was born on April 29, 1938, in Brooklyn, New York. His parents were Ralph and Sylvia Madoff, and his father, Ralph, was actually a plumber who eventually tried his hand as a stockbroker.
That is correct. Madoff graduated from Far Rockaway High School in 1956. His path to finance was not a straight line through the Ivy League.
Which is a pretty common misconception, right? People assume all these top-tier Wall Street figures come from Harvard or Yale.
They do often assume that, yes. He actually attended the University of Alabama for 1 year, where he was a member of the Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity before transferring to Hofstra University. He graduated from Hofstra in 1960 with a degree in political science.
And he also briefly attended Brooklyn Law School, but he withdrew after his first year. He had a completely different ambition. He wanted to start his own firm. And this brings us to the seed money, which is fascinating.
This is a significant detail regarding the scale of what was to come. In 1960, he founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC. He started this punny stock brokerage with just $5,000.
And he earned that initial $5,000 working as a lifeguard and installing irrigation sprinklers. It's such a blue-collar beginning for a man who would eventually handle billions.
If we adjust that $5,000 for inflation, it is equivalent to approximately $54,000 in 2025. It was a modest start. However, he had assistance.
Right, the father-in-law.
Yes. His father-in-law, Saul Alpern, was an accountant. Alpern loaned Madoff $50,000 and significantly referred a circle of friends and their families to Madoff. This established the initial network of investors.
So right from the very beginning, the entire business was built on personal networks and trust. But I think we have to distinguish between the fraud and the legitimate success here, because Madoff was legitimately successful in one specific area of the market.
He was. This is the technological innovation aspect of his career. In the 1960s and 1970s, Madoff started with penny stocks. These were traded via the National Quotation Bureau's pink sheets.
Which was a very manual, paper-heavy process back then.
It was. Madoff's firm began utilizing computer information technology to disseminate quotes.
This was revolutionary at the time, wasn't it?
It allowed him to bypass the traditional exchange floor specialists. This technology that his firm helped develop eventually became the National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotations Stock Market.
Which we all know today as NASDAQ.
Correct. And he eventually served as the chairman of NASDAQ. This is crucial for understanding why people trusted him implicitly. He was a pioneer of electronic trading. He cemented his legitimacy through a practice called payment for order flow, or PFOF.
Can you break that concept down for us? How exactly does payment for order flow work?
In payment for order flow, a dealer pays a broker for the right to execute a customer's order. It has frequently been called a legal kickback. Madoff was a prominent practitioner of this.
And he defended it pretty aggressively.
He defended it by comparing it to a stocking manufacturer paying a supermarket for shelf space. He argued it did not alter the price the customer received.
So you have this legitimate side of the business, the market making, the electronic trading, and it was generating real revenue. It cemented his status on Wall Street. He was a visionary in that specific technological space. But underneath all of this, the architecture of the lie was being built.
The firm was physically divided to accommodate this. The legitimate stock brokerage and market-making business, the public-facing side, was on the 19th floor of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan.
And the asset management business, the side handling the investor capital.
That was on the 17th floor. This was where the Ponzi scheme operated. Access to the 17th floor was highly restricted. This is where the key players in the fraud worked.
Who exactly were those key players?
You had his brother, Peter Madoff, who was the senior managing director and chief compliance officer. You had his sons, Mark and Andrew, who worked in the trading section on the 19th floor, though they maintained they were completely unaware of the fraud on the 17th floor. And you had his niece, Shaina Madoff, who was the compliance attorney.
The core of the asset management business, the fraud itself, relied on a very specific investment strategy that Madoff claimed to be using. He called it the split-straight conversion.
This is a term that sounds highly sophisticated, which was part of its utility. The strategy, as Madoff explained it to investors, involved buying a basket of blue-chip stocks, essentially mimicking the S&P 100 index.
Okay, so he buys the stocks. What comes next in this strategy to guarantee those returns?
To hedge the downside risk, meaning to protect against the stocks dropping in value, he would buy option contracts called puts. And to fund the purchase of those puts, he would sell option contracts called calls.
So in theory, this limits the potential loss, but it also caps the potential gain. It creates a very narrow band of returns.
Exactly. And that matched the returns Madoff was showing investors. Consistent, steady returns, regardless of whether the broader market was up or down.
But the reality of what was happening on the 17th floor was quite different.
The reality was that the strategy was a complete fiction. Investigations eventually revealed that no legitimate investments were made with client money in the asset management unit since at least the early 1990s.
And some evidence suggests it went back even further, right?
Evidence suggests the fraud may have gone back as far as the 1960s.
So if he wasn't buying stocks, and he wasn't buying or selling options, what was he actually doing with all of this money?
The mechanics were straightforward. Client money was deposited into a Chase Manhattan business account. When a client wanted to cash out, Madoff simply withdrew money from that same account to pay them. It was the textbook definition of robbing Peter to pay Paul.
But to keep this going for decades, the paperwork had to look absolutely perfect. How did they manage to fake the records for so long without setting off alarm bells?
This was the primary work of the 17th floor employees, specifically Annette Bongiorno and Joanne Krupe. They created false trading reports. Madoff would tell them what exact return he wanted a specific customer to have for a given period.
And they would just work backward from that number?
Yes. They would look at historical stock data. They would pick the monthly highs or lows for various stocks to generate the specific profit Madoff demanded. They utilized a computer program specially designed to backdate trades.
So they were effectively trading in the past?
In the paper records, yes. They created bogus baskets of stocks to match these fake returns. However, being human, they made clerical errors.
What kind of errors?
Sometimes they listed trades as having occurred on weekends or federal holidays, days when the markets were completely closed.
Yet somehow no one caught it at the time.
No. And part of the reason it was not caught lies with the auditor. A firm of Madoff's size should have been audited by a major accounting firm. Instead, it was audited by Freeling and Horowitz,
Which was a three-person firm.
with only one active accountant, David G. Freeling. He essentially rubber-stamped the filings for years without conducting any actual audit procedures.
The scale of this deception, because it was a Ponzi scheme, required a constant influx of new money to pay off the old investors. And this brings us to the concept of affinity fraud, which Madoff mastered.
Affinity fraud relies on leveraging trust within a specific demographic group. Madoff targeted wealthy Jewish communities, country clubs, specifically the Palm Beach Country Club in Florida, and various charitable organizations.
He really used exclusivity as a psychological lever.
He did. This is a critical psychological component of his operation. Madoff would often reject funds initially. He would tell prospective investors that he was not taking new money right now, or he would tell them they could invest, but they had to keep it strictly confidential.
Which, of course, made people want to invest even more.
Precisely. It created a powerful fear of missing out. It made being a Madoff investor a highly sought-after status symbol. He was not chasing investors, they were chasing him. This strategy worked on wealthy individuals, but it was equally effective on organizations.
The list of victims includes some very prominent organizations. Groups like Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America.
And the Eli Wiesel Foundation, Steven Spielberg's Wunderkinder Foundation. It is important to note that this was not just about wealthy individuals losing a portion of their investment portfolio. Hospitals and charities were forced to close permanently because their endowments were entirely wiped out.
When we talk about the overall losses, you always hear the number $65 billion cited in the press.
That $65 billion figure includes the fabricated gains. It is the money people thought they had because their fraudulent statements indicated that balance. The actual direct losses, meaning the cash that was deposited and disappeared, was estimated by the SIPC trustee at around $18 billion.
And there is a concept here that emerged during the recovery process called net winners.
Yes. About half of the investors actually took out more money than they put in over the lifespan of their accounts. In the eyes of the bankruptcy trustee, they were beneficiaries of the scheme, even if they had no knowledge of the fraud.
So they were targeted to give that money back.
They were subject to clawback lawsuits to return those false profits so the recovered funds could be redistributed to the victims who lost their initial principal.
Now, throughout this time, over these decades, there were people who suspected something was very wrong. The most famous example is Harry Markopolos.
Harry Markopolos is a mathematician and financial analyst. In 1999, he was working for a rival trading firm. His superiors asked him to replicate Madoff's returns so they could offer a similar product to their own clients.
And he found that he couldn't do it.
He could not. He analyzed the split-strike conversion strategy we discussed, and he ran the numbers. He later stated it took him 4 minutes to see the numbers did not add up, and 4 hours to prove mathematically that it was a fraud.
What was the primary piece of evidence for him? What made it mathematically impossible?
The trading volume. To execute the split-strike conversion strategy at the massive size Madoff claimed to be managing, Madoff would have needed to buy more options contracts than actually existed on the Chicago Board Options Exchange.
So the market simply wasn't big enough for Madoff to be doing what he said he was doing.
Correct. The derivative volume required was a mathematical impossibility.
And Markopolos didn't just keep this information to himself. He went directly to the SEC.
He went repeatedly. In 2000, 2001, 2005, and 2007, he provided the Securities and Exchange Commission with detailed, highly technical submissions explaining exactly why Madoff's operation had to be either a Ponzi scheme or an illegal front-running operation.
And yet, nothing happened. They completely missed it.
The regulatory failures were profound. The SEC did conduct investigations, but they failed to check the most basic elements of the business. Madoff himself later expressed astonishment at their incompetence. He admitted that investigators acted like Lieutenant Columbo but never asked the right questions.
He specifically mentioned the depository trust company records during his interviews later on.
He did. If the SEC investigators had simply called the Depository Trust Company, which is the central clearinghouse for Wall Street, and asked to see Madoff's trading records, they would have seen nothing.
Because he wasn't holding any of the billions in stocks he claimed to have.
Exactly. The investigation would have been concluded in a single phone call.
There is also a significant conflict of interest that has been discussed regarding the SEC's failure to act.
Yes. There was a romantic relationship between an SEC investigator, Eric Swanson, and Shana Madoff, who was Bernie's niece and the firm's compliance attorney.
They eventually got married.
They did. Swanson denied participating in any inquiries involving Madoff while he was in the relationship, but the situation heavily contributed to the public perception of a captured and compromised regulator.
Despite all of these warnings, despite Markopolos, the scheme continued uninterrupted until 2008. So what was the trigger that finally brought the whole thing crashing down?
It was the 2008 global financial crisis. The massive market collapse caused a severe liquidity crunch. Investors, needing cash to cover heavy losses elsewhere in their portfolios, began requesting immediate redemptions from Madoff.
They just wanted their money back.
They requested approximately $7 billion in redemptions. The problem was, the Chase account only held $234 million.
The math finally caught up with him. He literally just ran out of cash to pay the old investors.
The timeline of the confession is very compressed at this point. On December 3, 2008, Madoff told his assistant, Frank DePascali, that he was finished. On December 9, he told his brother, Peter.
And then came the confrontation with his sons, Mark and Andrew.
On December 10, 2008, Madoff suggested paying out $173 million in bonuses 2 months early. This deeply alarmed his sons. They went to his office and asked how he could possibly pay out bonuses if the firm was having trouble paying clients.
They eventually went to his apartment to get the truth out of him.
Yes, to his Manhattan penthouse apartment. It was there that Madoff finally admitted to his sons that the entire asset management business was one big lie and basically a giant Ponzi scheme.
What did the sons do with that information?
They left the apartment and immediately contacted a lawyer, who then contacted federal authorities. They reported their father.
Madoff was arrested the very next day, December 11th, 2008.
There is a tragic sidebar here regarding his wife, Ruth Madoff. She later claimed that she and Bernie entered into a suicide pact on Christmas Eve 2008, swallowing pills in a failed attempt to end their lives.
The legal consequences followed very swiftly after that.
On March 12, 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies. These included securities fraud, money laundering, and perjury.
Did he cut a deal with the prosecution?
No. There was no plea bargain. He did not agree to cooperate, to name any co-conspirators. He maintained throughout that he acted entirely alone, although the evidence and the subsequent convictions of his employees clearly proved otherwise.
The sentencing was handled by Judge Denny Chin.
The prosecution requested 150 years in federal prison. The defense requested 12 years, citing Madoff's life expectancy, as he was 71 at the time. Judge Chin sentenced him to the absolute maximum of 150 years.
The judge really wanted to send a message to the public and to Wall Street.
He stated on the record that he called the crimes extraordinarily evil. The financial judgment was also massive, resulting in a $170 billion forfeiture order. Ruth Madoff was forced to forfeit her claim to $85 million in assets. She was left with $2.5 million.
What happened to the accomplices? Because, as you mentioned, he didn't act alone.
Peter Madoff, his brother, was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Frank DePascali, his right-hand man on the 17th floor, pleaded guilty but died of lung cancer in 2015 before he could be sentenced. The accountant, David Freeling, cooperated extensively with authorities and was sentenced to home detention.
The tragedy of the Madoff family really extends far beyond the courtroom. I think we need to look at the timeline of what happened to his sons and family members in the years following the arrest.
It is a complete dismantling of a family. Mark Madoff, the son who had reported his father, faced intense public scrutiny and relentless lawsuits from the bankruptcy trustee. On December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years to the day after his father's arrest, Mark was found dead in his apartment. It was a suicide by hanging.
And Andrew Madoff.
Andrew was diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma. He died on September 3, 2014. He maintained until the very end that he had been entirely betrayed by his father.
There is an even more recent tragedy involving the extended family that many people might not be aware of.
This occurred in February 2022. Madoff's sister, Sandra Weiner, and her husband, Marvin, were found dead in their home in Boynton Beach, Florida.
What were the exact circumstances of that?
Police labeled the incident a murder-suicide. It was a grim final footnote to the family's history, occurring just a year after Bernie's own death.
Let's discuss Madoff's life in prison because he spent his final years incarcerated. He was sent to the Federal Correctional Institution Butner Medium in North Carolina.
He was assigned Bureau of Prisons Register Number 61727-054. His projected release date was mathematically set for January 31st, 2137.
How was he treated inside the facility? You hear different stories.
There were multiple reports that he was treated with respect by some inmates. He was frequently referred to as Uncle Bernie. There was a certain awe among the prison population regarding the sheer scale of his theft.
But it wasn't all peaceful for him.
No. In 2009, he was treated at the Prison Medical Center for facial injuries and broken ribs. The official story provided by Madoff in the Bureau of Prisons was that he had experienced dizziness and hypertension, causing him to fall out of his bed. However, persistent rumors indicated he was actually assaulted by another inmate.
There was also a really strange connection to organized crime inside the prison walls.
Reportedly, Madoff befriended Carmine Persico. Persico was the notorious boss of the Colombo crime family in New York. There were reports that after an inmate slapped Madoff for changing the television channel in a common area, Persico stepped in and intimidated the attacker. It appears Madoff found a level of physical protection under the wing of the mob.
His health severely declined over the years he spent at Butner.
He suffered a heart attack in 2013. In 2020, it was revealed through court filings that he had end-stage chronic kidney failure. His lawyers officially requested compassionate release, arguing to the court that he had less than 18 months to live.
And that request was denied by the courts?
It was explicitly denied. The courts determined that the unprecedented severity of his financial crimes outweighed his deteriorating health condition.
Bernie Madoff died on April 14, 2021.
He died at the Federal Medical Center in Butner. The official causes of death were listed as hypertension, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and chronic kidney disease. He was 82 years old.
And the final disposition of his remains was quite unusual given his background.
He was cremated. This is completely contrary to traditional Jewish custom. As of 2023, reports indicated that his ashes remained entirely unclaimed at a lawyer's office. It speaks volumes to the total isolation he faced at the end of his life.
We should look at the financial recovery efforts before we conclude. In many Ponzi schemes, the money is just gone. It's spent. But here, the recovery has actually been surprisingly substantial.
That is highly notable in this case. The Madoff Victim Fund and the court-appointed trustee, Irving Picard, have recovered over $14 billion to date.
That is more than 70% of the allowed claims.
In the world of financial fraud, recovering 70 cents on the dollar is an exceptionally high number. It is a testament to the aggressive pursuit of lawsuits against the net winners we discussed earlier, as well as litigation against the major banks and feeder funds that enabled the scheme.
Madoff's story remains a fixture in our culture. We've seen major media portrayals by Robert De Niro in The Wizard of Lies and Richard Dreyfuss in Madoff. It's something that just stays in the public consciousness.
It serves as a permanent cautionary tale regarding financial markets. It reminds investors of the dangerous allure of the impossible return.
And it strongly reminds us of the total failure of oversight. The fact that the biggest fraud in history was happening in plain sight, with explicit mathematical warnings ignored by regulators for nearly a decade.
It forces individuals and institutions to fundamentally question who they trust and why. Madoff weaponized trust. He used his impressive resume, his religious affiliations, and his high social standing to successfully bypass the critical thinking of his victims.
The human cost went far beyond the money on the balance sheets. It cost lives, it permanently destroyed families, and it shattered public faith in the financial system in a way that we still feel today.
And that institutional damage takes much longer to repair than the financial ledgers.
Thank you for joining us for this thorough analysis of the life, the crimes, and the massive impact of Bernard Madoff. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.